Bob Saget passed away unexpectedly in January 2022. In the months that followed, his longtime Los Angeles home in the Brentwood neighborhood quietly went on the market. It wasn't the house he died in, that was a Florida hotel room, but this place had been his personal sanctuary for nearly 2 decades. A modest, ivy-draped 2-story in the hills above Sunset Boulevard, shaded by eucalyptus and camphor trees. Warm, understated, private like Saget himself. By October 2022, the house was sold off-market to a couple from Santa Barbara, James and Christina Lockwood, both in their late 30s. James was an orthopedic surgeon. Christina, a designer and owner of a small vintage furniture shop. With 3 kids under 10 and a golden retriever named Milo, they were looking for a permanent move to the city. They described the house as timeless, and it was hardwood floors, open beams, soft natural light in every room. The Lockwoods didn't believe in ghosts. They weren't superstitious. Christina even joked at the closing, "I'd love to live in Bob Saget's house. Maybe it'll be funnier." But the house had something else. Not just history, a presence. From the first week, things felt slightly off. Harmless at first. The motion lights in the hallway flickered at night. Doors they had closed gently opened again. Milo, their dog, refused to walk down the back staircase, growling at empty air. The kids began waking up with strange dreams. All 3 of them separately described the tall man in the mirror, a figure that smiled too much. Christina assumed it was stress from the move or something they'd seen online. But when their middle child, Daisy, drew a picture of the man, her parents froze. It was him. Not Saget exactly, but an exaggerated version. Overly tall, a giant toothy grin, eyes too wide. Almost like a caricature, but wrong, sinister, distorted. In early November, James converted the small recording studio on the property into a study. Saget had used it for podcasts and Zoom shows during the pandemic. James started hearing things at night while working, their soft laughter behind him. Always behind. Sometimes it was a chuckle, low and familiar. Other times, it erupted, like a punchline no one else heard. He assumed it was audio interference or his own exhaustion, until one night he turned off the lights and saw a figure sitting in the chair across the room, just barely lit by the streetlight through the blinds. A tall man with shoulders hunched and head tilted, smiling like he was waiting for something. James never worked in that room again. Christina started bringing pieces from her shop into the living room to photograph them in the natural light. She swore that when she left certain items, old lamps, a 1950s TV stand, an antique vanity mirror, they'd be repositioned by morning. Not just shifted, but arranged as if part of a set. Worse, the mirror began showing things that weren't their shadows, that moved independently of her. Once, she saw herself reflected with someone else's hand on her shoulder. There was no one in the room. By Christmas, they tried to host friends. A couple visiting from out of town stayed 2 nights before suddenly checking into a hotel. They didn't say why. Later, the Lockwoods found a note in the guest room trash. "He watches while you sleep. I don't think he knows he's dead." Christina wanted to leave. James resisted. "There's no such thing as haunted houses," he told her. "Only haunted people." But he didn't sleep anymore. Not well. And he'd begun checking every mirror before using it. In late January, a full year after Saget's passing, Christina was home alone, cleaning the old shelves in the living room when she heard a man's voice say behind her, "That's not where that goes." She spun around. No one. She stared at the mirror across the room and saw something move inside it. Not her reflection. Not the furniture. Something else. The man with the too wide grin, holding something small in his hand. A microphone. He raised it to his lips and then, "This one's for the crowd in the back." Every light in the house went out. Since then, the Lockwoods have moved out temporarily, citing electrical problems. The house sits mostly quiet now, windows drawn, grass slightly overgrown. Some nights, neighbors say they still hear laughter echoing faintly through the open air. Not angry, not threatening, just misplaced, like a joke told to an empty room. And somewhere in the dark, someone is still waiting for the applause. The Lockwoods did not speak much that night. Christina stood in the center of the darkened living room, the walls breathing with silence, her skin prickling beneath the soft weight of something unseen. James returned home 20 minutes later, found her sitting stiffly on the edge of the couch, every candle in the room lit, her eyes fixed on the hallway mirror as if it might move again. She didn't tell him what she saw not then. She only said, "There's something wrong here," and left it at that. James checked the circuit breakers. Nothing had tripped. The power, strangely, returned on its own after midnight, humming softly to life as if nothing had happened. The clocks blinked back to 12 o'clock, but every phone, every appliance, every lamp was dead for hours. When they did power back on, the thermostat read 77, though they always kept it at 70. The next morning, James noticed something small on his nightstand. It hadn't been there before. Playing card. The jack of spades. The corner was bent and smudged. The face unusually faded, the jack's grin almost mocking, almost alive. They tried to normalize their lives again. James buried himself in work. Christina kept the kids busy with school and museum visits and afternoons at the park, but it became harder to stay in the house past dark. The hallway lights would turn on and off at random, always between 3:10 and 3:20 a.m. without fail. Once, they woke to find the front door unlocked, though James was obsessive about checking it before bed. Another morning, the pantry was wide open, and every cereal box was turned backward, the nutrition facts facing out like a row of silent warnings. And then came the laughing. It didn't always come from one place. Sometimes it was from upstairs, a quick burst of low chuckles, the kind you hear in an audience before a punchline. Sometimes from the bathroom mirror, barely audible under the sound of running water. Once, Christina swore she heard a deep voice say, very softly, "That one didn't land, did it?" She stood frozen at the kitchen sink, hand clutching a sponge, the water running over her fingers until it was nearly scalding. And then the voice again. Tough crowd tonight. Late February, James finally returned to the old studio, the room he had abandoned after seeing the seated figure weeks before. He told himself he was imagining things, that grief could take on forms, that the brain sought patterns, explanations, faces even in darkness. He brought a digital recorder with him, left it running on the desk, facing the empty chair across the room. He didn't stay. The next morning, he listened to the file. It began with silence, then static. Then, 47 minutes in, there was a voice. Not James, not Christina. Something distant, tired, and slow, like it was rehearsing. "So I walked into a house, no applause, no one even noticed. Funny, right?" Long pause. "You ever get so lost in the punchline, you forget the setup?" Laughter. Muted. Artificial. Like a laugh track buried under static. James didn't finish listening. He deleted the file. But later that night, when he plugged his phone into the wall charger, he found the same audio file downloaded onto it with a new name. Finalset.wave. Christina had stopped using the antique mirror altogether. She covered it with a quilt from her grandmother, tacked it down with thumbtacks. But some mornings, she would find the fabric peeled back, the mirror fogged, as if someone had breathed heavily against the glass. Once, she stood in front of it after waking from a vivid dream. In the dream, she had wandered through a dim hallway of red curtains and heavy laughter. People she couldn't see whispered behind her. When she faced the mirror that morning, it was completely clear. No fog, no distortion, but there was writing in the dust, letters etched by a finger that didn't belong to anyone in the house. "You're still here, so am I." She left the room and didn't return for 2 days. The couple who had left during the holidays, James's old college friend, Alex, and his wife Tara, returned in March to pick up a bag they had accidentally left behind. Christina handed it to them at the door. Before they left, Tara pulled Christina aside. "There's something in that house," she whispered. "I know how it sounds, but it's like he's still working on something, like he didn't get to finish." Christina didn't respond. She didn't have to. The look in her eyes was enough. As they walked away, Tara turned back one last time. "I think he thinks it's still his show." The house began to feel more like a stage. Lights that dimmed like spotlights, laughter from unseen corners, and something watching, always waiting for the next act. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. There was a sense, by mid-March, that the house no longer belonged to them. James wouldn't admit it aloud, not even to himself. But in the quiet, in the space between his patients and long commutes, he began to notice a deep fatigue in his bones, not just from sleeplessness. A kind of spiritual heaviness, as though something in the house was draining him slowly, pulling at his strength, one forgotten key, one misplaced sock, one flickering bulb at a time. Christina, on the other hand, had grown wary of silence. She began leaving the television on in every room she entered. Not for entertainment, but for company. She said it dulled the feeling of being watched. But it never really worked. The lights in the upstairs hallway now flicked on exactly at 3:14 a.m. every morning. Never a second sooner or later. One by one, in order. Like stage lights preparing a performer's path. Then came the audience. Not real, of course, but present. A sound would drift through the house in the early hours, not footsteps, not whispers. Applause. Slow, indifferent applause. Like from an old television broadcast, warped with age, bleeding through unseen speakers. It would come in bursts, sometimes following nothing at all. Sometimes just as Christina closed a door, or when James turned off the bathroom light. Once, James stood at the foot of the stairs and clapped his hands loudly, as if mocking the presence, challenging it. He laughed, half-heartedly. The laugh was returned. Not an echo, not his own. Something in the shadows behind him laughed back, a low, drawn-out chuckle. The kind that dripped sarcasm. He didn't sleep that night. One morning, Christina was cleaning out the closet in the guest room, the same one where their friends had slept during the holidays. She had avoided it for weeks. Something about that room felt different from the rest, as if the air were slightly heavier, colder, more compact. While shifting an old garment rack, the bottom rail jammed against something that didn't give like drywall should. Behind the coats, she pressed her hand flat against the wall. Sounded hollow, too hollow. That night, with James reluctantly assisting, they used a stud finder and discovered a narrow seam that outlined a square 4 feet wide, about 6 feet high. A sealed door, painted over. The kids were sent to stay with Christina's sister that weekend. On Saturday, they pried the panel open. What lay behind it was not another room, not a crawlspace, not even storage. It was a narrow, vertical shaft, a space between walls, no wider than a coffin. Floorboards above and below. And on the inside of this vertical shaft, nailed to the wall with small brass tacks, were pages. Script pages. Hundreds of them, yellowed with age. Some typed, others handwritten. Covered in scribbled edits and red pen notes. Christina recognized the handwriting from old photos of Saget's journals she'd seen online. It was his. They were jokes, sketches, one-liners, pages of material, some complete, others rambling, looping, unfinished. Many were labeled with names: final set, darkroom bits, mirrorwork, riff audience cold, and dozens more. But one page was different. It was newer, white paper, crisp ink. Typed in all caps, centered. It's not over until they laugh. And below, handwritten. One more good one, then I'll go. They sealed the space again. James didn't want to disturb it further. Christina insisted on leaving it open, afraid of what might happen if they trapped it inside again. The mirror in the living room, the one Christina had covered, began to hum at night. That's the only word she could find for it. A low vibration she could feel more than hear. As if something inside the glass was waiting to come through. She stopped covering it. Instead, she began watching it. Not constantly, not obsessively, but like a sentry at a post. For 15-20 minutes a night, she would sit on the couch with the lights off and just observe. Sometimes, the room behind her looked slightly altered in the reflection. The lampshade tilted the wrong way. A chair turned that hadn't moved. Sometimes, there was someone in it. Not always clearly, not as a person you could point to, but as a presence, a distortion in the glass, like a ripple underwater. A tall silhouette with a sloped neck and heavy shoulders, standing behind her. Once, she raised her hand slowly, holding it up in front of the mirror. In the reflection, the silhouette raised its hand, two but not in sync. It moved after her, delayed, deliberate, and when it did, she saw just briefly a microphone in its other hand. James hadn't dreamed in weeks, not since the night he clapped into the darkness. Then one night the dream came. He was standing backstage, alone, a red curtain to his left, dim overhead lights above, the sound of a low audience murmur beyond the curtain. He turned, slowly, and there was a dressing table lit by classic Hollywood bulbs. The mirror was cracked straight down the middle. Bob Saget sat in the chair, facing away from James, his shoulders hunched, dressed in a rumpled blazer and holding a cue card in his lap. He was whispering something, over and over, his voice hoarse. James leaned in to hear. Just one more, just one more, just one more. Then Saget turned. Only it wasn't Saget. It looked like him in the way a wax figure resembles the living. But the skin was too tight, the grin too wide, and the eyes were wrong. Wet, gleaming, empty. The figure pointed at James with a slow, heavy hand. "Tag out," it whispered. "Your turn now." James woke drenched in sweat. The jack of spades was on his pillow. After James' dream, nothing in the house felt real anymore. The sunlight that filtered through the kitchen windows each morning seemed paler, more artificial. The ticking of the dining room clock now echoed like a stage cue. Even the scent of the place, cedar, coffee, and old leather, was changing, subtly, gradually. It now held a faint tang of something else. Old makeup, burnt wiring, warm plastic, like the inside of a television studio that no longer had power. James began sleeping in the children's room, with the dog curled at his feet and the closet door propped open with a chair. He didn't explain it to Christina. He didn't need to. Christina spent more time in front of the mirror, no longer afraid, but no longer herself. She seemed tuned to it, like a performer waiting for her entrance cue. Sometimes James would find her muttering words under her breath, incomplete sentences, "That's a good one," or "They didn't laugh," or just "reset, reset, reset." The children, meanwhile, had stopped sleeping altogether. Milo barked at corners of the room. Drawings appeared under their beds, scrawled in crayon, always of the same thing. A man holding a mic, smiling, in front of an invisible crowd. The hallway lights continued their ritual at 3:14 a.m., each bulb flaring to life one by one, always leading toward the mirror. By April, they'd had enough. They didn't want to sell. They didn't want the headlines. Christina didn't want to be interviewed by morning shows or ghost hunter channels. They just wanted out. The plan was simple. Get the kids, get some clothes, and stay in a rental in Topanga until they could quietly break the lease. Maybe claim electrical damage. Maybe say a death in the family made it hard to stay. Anything but the truth. That night, their final night in the house, was quiet. Too quiet. There was no laughter, no applause, no flickering lights. The mirror was still, blank. The house seemed asleep. They packed quickly. James carried bags to the car while Christina loaded snacks for the road. The kids were bundled in the back seat, half asleep, Milo snoring softly under a blanket. And then she realized they'd forgotten something. Not a phone, not a wallet. The quilt, the one she used to cover the mirror. It had belonged to her grandmother, hand-stitched, faded blue and gold. James sighed. Leave it. But something in her stomach turned. A guilt, maybe, or a tug. She went back. The living room was darker than it should have been. The mirror was uncovered, though she was sure she had placed the quilt back over it that morning. The mirror reflected the room as it was. Except for one thing. A man stood behind her. She didn't turn. She couldn't. He didn't move. Just stood, tall and patient, smiling slightly. No longer warped. No longer a shadow. He was clearer now, more solid than ever. His face wasn't Bob Saget's. Not exactly. It was a version of him. Smoothed over, artificial, like a deep fake filtered through decades of reruns. But the smile that was his, that was always his. In his hand was a microphone. He raised it slowly, deliberately. Christina spoke aloud, though her voice shook. "What do you want?" The man in the mirror tilted his head. Then, with eerie calm, he answered, "Just one last set." The mirror rippled. Christina screamed. From the car, James heard it. He ran back inside, shouting her name, chest pounding. He found her slumped on the floor in front of the mirror, eyes wide open, tears streaking her cheeks, but silent. Still, she was breathing, but barely responsive. James carried her out. He never went back in again. The Lockwoods left that night. They didn't tell their friends why. The realtor said they claimed a mold problem. The house was quietly listed again, but never officially posted. It sits still, tucked behind tall hedges, the lawn slightly dry, the porch lights sometimes flickering at dusk. Occasionally, neighbors say they hear voices at night, not shouting, not arguing, jokes, quietly told, as if to no one, followed by delayed laughter, the kind that drifts. And once in a while, someone walking a dog will glance up and see the window above the living room lit from within. Just a warm spotlight, and behind the glass, the silhouette of a man standing with a microphone. Waiting, still smiling, still performing. Some say Bob Saget never left the house, not out of malice. But because the set wasn't over, the lights are still on, the audience is still listening, and every mirror is still his stage. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.